Hey guys, Board now back with you for the latest review of HBO's The Outsider. This is episode 8 of the first season, although with it being a mini-series and from one book, I think chances are this may be one and done. But we're getting towards the end now, episode 8 of 10, and it is called Foxhead. It's directed by J.D. Dillard and it's written by Richard Price, who is the showrunner. So let's get into it. I really liked last week's. And this week's, it's fair to say, we've had some freaky stuff going on in this show, some outright odd stuff. But I think this week you had some of the most disturbing stuff of the series so far. Probably the most disturbing. I think it was just so visual and the sounds of the thing. And what I'm referring to is that this week things really come to a head with Jack and with the entity that, let's call it El Coco, because we actually see El Coco starting to feed off people because it's getting to the point now where it's getting weaker and it needs to feed, and so it's actually using Jack to find it food essentially, and it leads to some really gross and disturbing scenes. So originally Jack commandeers a guy who's fishing, so he's by the side of the river, he's there fishing, and suddenly out of nowhere he gets shot and it's Jack, so it's off camera, and in the next instance we just hear this really distinct sound, and you can see it in the background. So Jack is in the foreshot of the camera, and then El Coco is just in the background. You see like a shadowy sort of figure, and just you can see the movements that he's just like digging into to this poor guy, and he's just feeding off him, and you can hear particularly the sounds of the mouth and, well, if you want to call it food for lack of a better term, like just like the sort of sucking and yeah, those sounds basically, all very gooey, all very I'm not quite sure what I'm trying to say here, but it's very you really get the atmosphere. Now, on the one hand, I think this sort of scene may look a little bit silly just because you've got the like, as I said, the shadow of El Coco, and he's doing this insane sort of thing, and because the sounds are just like turned up, I think potentially it could come across as I said, just a bit silly, but I think it's just so gross and just so disturbing. Then it's not that at all. It really plays very well, and it also adds to the mythology of the show. So it's important for those reasons. I think the other reason it's such a disturbing scene is the fact that you see Jack's expression as this is going on. So he's obviously not looking, he can't bear to look, but it's almost like him reacting to what's happening and the fact that he's responsible. And this actor playing Jack is doing a great job of really selling the torment, really getting that across through his body language and his facial expressions. So it's a great scene. But then we find out later then El Coco still isn't satisfied, and the reason for that is because the guy he ate actually had cancer, and so that's an interesting little rule. Then it can't really feed off anyone who is dying like that, who has like a disease like cancer. So it's sort of bad news for Jack, because it means like the Thing has to go and find someone else, or he has to go and find someone else for the Thing. So this is the episode where Claude, the Paddy Constantine character, really comes into focus. So we've seen in the previous episodes, then he was touched by the doppelganger version of Terry, touched on the arm, and it was caught on camera, and he had a funny reaction. And over time, having only seen him for like random scenes, but it's become obvious then he has been affected by the entity. So in this episode, he's really in focused a lot more. So last time we saw he quit his job and decided to go on the road. He obviously got a generous, sort of payoff from the strip club owner. And we see how he's going across state now to visit his brother. So this episode has a nice little setup, because essentially it's like a field trip almost. So it follows Claude going to see his brother. It follows like the group with Holly going and trying to track them down. Holly has this idea then if they can get to Claude first and they can isolate him, then he'll be safe while they figure out how to handle the entity. Basically, for it to totally take over Claude, it has to really get inside him. It has to, just take him over completely. And there just seems to be this little rule throughout in this episode where Holly says we have to vouch for Claude for his whereabouts to kind of keep him safe, essentially. So the idea is to like hole him up in like this cabin. But yeah, it's a fun little episode because it does change locations, and this sort of out in the sticks, this like woodland type setting, it does have a very distinct look to it. Some nice little colours and just like sceneries, and it leads to this very interesting sort of thing at the end, which I'll talk about in a moment. But again, it's building this sense of a group, and then just them all on the trail of this thing, and slowly they're all really coming around to Holly's way of thinking. And what this episode does is you get some interesting pairings. Now, maybe if there's a criticism with this side of things, it's the fact that there's perhaps too many characters at this point, considering they're all kind of on screen at the same time, or they're all working on the case or moving towards that. So there's probably maybe one or two too many at a time, so it's very hard to really give them that much to do. But they're all maybe, apart from Andy in a way. I think maybe he's only really there because he has a relationship with Holly, and it's a fine relationship. It's quite sweet, but he doesn't really add much to the plot. Whereas I think the others, although they're someone like Alec, obviously quite a small part, but even so, it does add something. It's a nice little role, but we do get these interesting sort of pairings. So Holly pairs off with Ralph essentially, so they travel together in a car, which is just perfect because of how opposed Ralph has been to Holly and how she is like the true outsider and he is kind of the true non-believer, and he slowly has to face his fears. And we also get Yell, who's we see more of in this episode, which is welcome. He's actually in a car with Andy. Now, there's an interesting thing with Alec, the Jeremy Bob character, because he doesn't actually go. He's one who decides not to go. And we see him with the lawyer, Howard. And the reason Alec decides not to go is because he has this past where he's been effective, like when he was like a soldier, and he had like potentially supernatural experiences as a soldier which traumatized him. And this is something where it cuts back and forth with him and Howard, and they're sort of talking, and it's something Alec feels badly about, the fact that because he feels like he's responsible for bringing Holly on board, and they obviously have quite a close bond, him and Holly, so he actually does feel bad about not being there and getting involved and backing her up. And what's interesting is that Howard, who has been this antagonist for them the whole season, obviously Glory's lawyer, he's actually supported of Alec in this episode. He's actually like a sounding board for Alec, and they talk about these things. And there's sort of a nice little like twist to things where not only does Alec end up catching up with the group in this, I'm not sure which city it's meant to be, but this new location, but Howard comes along for the ride as well, because why the hell not? So they're all there pretty much at the end. But that's quite interesting, the fact that Howard is quite supportive actually in this episode for the first time. And actually, there is a reason why. The reason, apart from the fact that I think ultimately he's not, maybe he's not as much of a dick as he comes across at times, but also the reason given in the episode is that Glory has decided to sue everyone except for Ralph, which Howard tells Ralph at one point. And he says, well, the reason is because she thinks if anyone can get her husband, Terry, off the hook, well, not off the hook because he's dead, but if anyone can clear his name, it is Ralph. So that's why she's decided not to take it easy on Ralph. So I think that's part of the motivation with Howard and taking this like renewed interest in what they're doing. But as I said, you do get some nice little like pairs in this episode. So Holly and Ralph is obviously worth talking about. Their relationship slowly coming together, and there's slowly more of a bond. And Holly says this interesting thing where she says, you challenge everything I say, and sometimes I need that. So sort of saying then it's the people who challenge her theories actually helps her more than the people who just go along with it and agree. And there's also like a funny little moment where Ralph tells Holly like this bizarre story from his past, which potentially could be supernatural. So it talks about his grandmother and a record that she liked in particular, and to do with it playing when she died, and then years later he was in a car, and his mother, I think it's then his mother had just died, and then suddenly that record happened to have come on the stereo, and he hadn't heard it since all those years before. And Holly just writes this off as a coincidence, and they sort of laugh about it because he's like, yeah, hey, that sounded like a pretty good antidote, and she's like, yeah, it was, but no, I still think it's a coincidence. So pretty cute little scene. So I think we're seeing that they're starting to come around a bit and starting to bond a bit more. Ralph is, yeah, engaging with Holly a little bit more. And there's a couple of scenes like that because when we see Yoel and Andy in the car, they're just talking about Holly and the fact that obviously they're in a relationship. And Yoel just decides to rib Andy. Just he just tells this story about Holly, then she has like these powers, and one minute she's like normal, and the next she goes all supernatural, and he just plays it very deadpan, and then yeah, it's basically a rib on Andy, so that's quite a funny little scene. But yeah, it all builds up to Claude, so it's like them chasing Claude, and then obviously Al Coco and Jack heading in the same direction. And we see Claude's brother, then he works at this sort of, I don't know, like carnival type place. And so they reconnect, but they've telephoned ahead, Ralph and co. Yale, I think, has connections in particular. So they've telephoned ahead to the local police, and they've arranged almost for them to pick up Claude, so that he's isolated. So they pick him up and they just say, they don't actually give him a reason. He's driving at the time, so they take him to a cell. And then his brother, who's just like this macho arsehole, he comes along and he starts getting fired up. And we see this contrast with Claude being the much more like reserved, relaxed one of the two, and his brother just this like hyper masculine sort of guy. So I think you could also almost say there's like that's a play on like the doppelganger, the fact you have these twins, although they're not identical, but they're twins, and one's very different from the other. But yeah, his brother ends up getting put in jail as well, so they're both locked up. And then later on, obviously, eventually Ralph and Yoel and the rest of them catch up with them, and that's when they have to say, yeah, I've got, there's this message here from our police department. So we're going to take Claude. And Claude at this point is, I'm not going anywhere without my brother. So that's quite an interesting little turn. So okay, they take both brothers, and then they're holed up at this cabin. And Holly explains her theory to Claude, who naturally doesn't sort of buy into it, but he obviously, I guess, doesn't have that much choice, and he figures there must be something going on for them to go to all this trouble. And he can't really answer many of their questions. He claims that he's feeling fine, but I think that's just because he hasn't really noticed what's happening to him, and that it happens quite slowly. And we get various scenes at this cabin. So during the night, for example, there is a presence there, and there's like a loud noise, and Ralph is awoken. Again, some atmospheric, creepy scenes in this episode. And we see Claude react. We see Claude go to the door and sort of react to it, but it kind of looks like he's just checking to see if anything's there. But it's sort of played as quite a strange little scene. But man, the end of the episode is so well done, so freaky. Quite the twist in a way. So what happens is you see this family in like a camper van, and they drive into like some sort of a resort. I don't know what you would call it, but some sort of like, it's like just a reserve, and you've got all these different caves in there. And one of the caves we've seen El Coco and Jack in earlier. And at first you're wondering, why are we focusing on this family? You've got like parents and then a couple of kids, a daughter and a son. And so later on that night, because the boy, it's actually the girl who asks about this saber-tooth like cave. Where is it? Because they have all different caves. And like the girl at the entrance doesn't actually know, but then later on that night there's this whole sort of festival with people dressing as animals and with animal masks on, and that's where the episode title comes from, the Foxhead. So it's again very atmospheric, very kind of weird and trippy. Just this odd sort of, it almost reminds me of this scene from Roma sort of thing, where you just have this weird sort of cult, and it's not necessarily anything out of the blue, but it just feels quite random in a way. But in any case, things build and build, and we cut back and forth. We see the family doing various things, and we see the boy. The girl goes off to talk to a couple of boys who are there. You get the impression she's quite bored and she's acting out, and that the father in particular is having trouble kind of connecting with his daughter. So she goes off to talk to a couple of boys, and it's during this time then the son, who's the youngest I think, he goes off and he's looking for like the saber-tooth cave. And he talks to this mystery man in like the Foxhead mask of the title, and it'll become clear why he's got a mask on. But he asks, do you know where the saber-tooth cave is? And mystery man says, I'm not sure about that, but there is a similar cave I can take you to. And again, because it's a young boy, he naively goes along with him, so we follow them walking along, and it's a really well directed scene, because then it cuts to the sister's point of view, and she notices he's wandering off with this like mysterious guy in the Foxhead, and she suddenly drops what she's doing, reacts, starts shouting. She calls for the parents, and then they follow. And it's a pretty tense scene, because I think you've probably cottoned on, and this is something to do with El Coco, and that he's leading this boy away through a crowd, so the boy potentially is in danger. And the father catches up and confronts the guy, says, hey, that's my son, leave him alone, who are you? And there's this thing, because there's this crowd around them at this point, and then the thing just latches out at the father, and then he runs away, but his hood actually comes off. But it's a cleverly shot scene, because you don't get a good look at his face, and then he runs off, and obviously that's the end of the danger potentially, but he's escaped and we don't quite see who he is, which is notable. But so it basically looks like El Coco was looking for someone to feed off again. And it's sort of worth noting then he did, latch at the father. So he could have scratched him, which obviously he's done to other people. So it's possible the father might be infected. Sorry, we'll have to wait and see if it comes back to that. So what happens is at the end of the episode, they talk to the family, the local police, and then we see them look for Claude at the cabin. So they come to the cabin, and it's this thing where there's say we've got to take you in, or where were you last night? And they say he's a suspect, and obviously they're perplexed because he's been there the whole time. And then they show them the footage, so it's like on an iPad. Obviously someone got footage of it somehow, and it shows it, and it's Claude, or it's someone that looks like Claude underneath the mask. When it came off, it's revealed. So that's the big twist, because it's obviously the doppelganger can take on any form. So it's taken on the form of Claude. So that means El Coco has arrived, and Holly. It's a great scene. It's a really powerful scene because of the music and the way it cuts to Holly. So she just keeps repeating, "He's here." And then it cuts to the cave, and we get a shot of the doppelganger version of Claude, basically. So, wow. Quite the ending. I thought the episode was a little slow at time, but I did really like the direction and the ending, and there was some nice little character interactions as well. So good stuff, and certainly a really creepy episode. Some disturbing stuff in the episode. So there you have it. That's the 8th episode now of The Outsider, and it's really building up ahead of steam. And let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like and subscribe, and I should be back with episode 9 around about this time next week. Actually, before I go, I do want to put a theory out there about what might happen at the end, because I think this might be a one and done, like a mini series. But just thinking about the what happened with the father and the thing latching out, if he is infected, I think what might happen with this, I think it might be then they solve the case and they think they've stopped the El Coco. But I think there could be like a twist or a hint, then it's still out there. Then I think it might cut back to the father at the end or something like that, just suggesting that he's infected. So then the thing hasn't been stopped after all. I just think there could be something like that, just a shot to kind of as a twist and make you think. But we'll see. It's just a theory I've got. But there you have it, episode 8. Thanks for listening. I'll see you guys again soon. Goodbye.